Margaret Hayes stood at the edge of the ranch, watching the morning sun paint the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose. At 53, she'd learned that life didn't always follow the maps you drew for yourself. 3 months ago, she'd been living in Fort Worth, working at a diner that closed without warning. Now, here she was, about to cook breakfast for a crew of ranch hands she'd never met. The classified dat had been simple: cook needed for working ranch, room and board included. She'd called the number, spoken to a man named Frank who managed the operations, and within a week, she'd packed her few belongings and driven out to the Copper Creek Ranch. Margaret tied her apron and looked at the enormous cast-iron skillet waiting on the outdoor cooking station. The ranch house kitchen was being renovated, Frank had explained, so for now, she'd be cooking under a wooden shelter near the bunkhouse. It reminded her of summers at her grandmother's farm, where everything tasted better when prepared in the open air. The Cowboys arrived as the sun cleared the horizon. They were dusty, tired from the early morning work, and hungry. Margaret had prepared scrambled eggs with peppers, thick slices of bacon, and biscuits she'd made from her mother's recipe. She watched as they filled their plates, noting their quiet nods of appreciation. One man hung back from the group. He was tall, probably in his late 50s, with gray touching his temples and a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun. Unlike the others, who wore working clothes showing the wear of the day, his shirt was clean, his boots polished. He met her eyes and offered a small smile. "Ma'am, I'm Daniel Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Copper Creek." Margaret shook his hand, noting the strength in his grip and the kindness in his eyes. "Margaret Hayes, I hope the food suits everyone." "It's the best meal we've had in months," Danielle replied. "Frank mentioned you came from the city." "Fort Worth," she confirmed. "But I grew up on a farm." "This feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years." Over the following weeks, Margaret fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn, prepared 3 meals a day, and found herself genuinely enjoying the work. The Cowboys were respectful, always thanking her, often lingering to share stories about their days. Daniel appeared at every meal, always polite, always interested in her thoughts about the ranch. She learned that Daniel had worked at Copper Creek longer than anyone else. The other hands deferred to him, sought his advice. He knew every corner of the property, every head of cattle, every fence line that needed mending. Margaret found herself looking forward to their conversations. The way he listened when she spoke about her daughter in Colorado, her late husband who'd passed 5 years ago. One evening, as she cleaned up after dinner, Daniel approached with a troubled expression. "Margaret, could we talk for a moment?" She set down her dishcloth, suddenly worried. "Of course. Is something wrong with my cooking?" "No, nothing like that," he said quickly. "It's just that I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am." Margaret's heart quickened. She'd learned to be cautious, to protect herself. "Go on," she said quietly. Daniel looked out at the land, now purple in the twilight. "I don't just work here, Margaret. I own Copper Creek, all 1,500 acres of it." She stared at him, processing this information. "But why would you?" "Because I wanted you to see me for who I am, not what I have," he interrupted gently. "After my wife passed 3 years ago, people treated me differently. Like I was the ranch owner first, and Daniel second. When you arrived, you just saw another cowboy. You talked to me like a real person. I needed that more than you know." Margaret sat down on the wooden bench, her mind spinning. She thought about all their conversations, the easy comfort she'd felt with him. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Danielle replied, sitting beside her but keeping a respectful distance. "I just wanted you to know the truth, and I wanted to tell you that you've brought something back to this place. The men are happier. The ranch feels alive again. You brought warmth back to Copper Creek." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "I was afraid I'd lost my purpose after the diner closed. At my age, starting over felt impossible." "Starting over is never easy at any age," Daniel said softly. "But sometimes the best chapters come after we think the book is finished." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged. Margaret realized that kindness had brought her here, that taking a chance on an uncertain future had led her to this peaceful moment. She thought about how quickly she judged her place here, assuming she was just another hard hand, never imagining that the quiet cowboy beside her carried the weight of this entire operation on his shoulders. "Thank you for telling me," she finally said, "and thank you for giving me this chance." "Thank you for taking it," Danielle replied. "This ranch has been my life's work, but it's been lonely having you here." Hearing laughter again, tasting food made with carry-up, "It reminds me why I fought to keep this place." As the weeks turned to months, Margaret stayed at Copper Creek. She and Daniel grew closer, their friendship deepening into something neither had expected to find again. She learned that the greatest gifts often come disguised as ordinary moments, that home isn't always where you start, but where you're brave enough to begin again. Standing under that shelter, cooking for cowboys who became friends, for a man who saw her value when she doubted her own worth, Margaret understood that life's most beautiful surprises arrive when we're open to them. Sometimes all it takes is kindness, courage, and a willingness to stir the pot and see what comes of it.